Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, everyday discipleship, and ways that we as men can give life to others. My name is Tom Henderson, the founder of RESGEN, and I'm excited that you're tuning in for the podcast. Joining me in conversation today is a friend of mine named Troy Klongerbo. Troy is a husband, a business owner, and a brand new dad, a title that he's very excited about, especially after the heartbreak of losing their first baby to a miscarriage. On today's show, Troy and I discussed the different ways that he and his wife, Sarah, both processed and grieved that miscarriage, a loss that took place just days after announcing their pregnancy to their families. We also discuss how we can continue to feed our marriages during the extremely busy times of our lives, and how focusing on the faithfulness of God can help us fight the fear of the unknown and get us through whatever challenge we're facing. You ready for a good episode? Here's my conversation with Troy Klongerbo. Troy, man, it is good to have you here, brother.
Yes, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is good. I'm excited about. We're gonna cover a lot of ground today. But before we get into all of that, this is probably gonna be a little bit of an intro for some of the listeners to
Probably,
who you are.
Yeah.
So give a little snapshot of you, your family, what you do, and then we're gonna get into it.
Yeah. So name's Troy Klongerbo. I've lived in Sioux Falls now going on 15 years. I came to Sioux Falls as a member of the University of Sioux Falls golf team, men's golf. Tom and I have that USF connection.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and married to my wife Sarah here. We've been married this fall will be 7 years. And yeah, that's kind of high level on me. I'm still young. I'm 32 years old. When you texted me to be on a podcast, I was like, what wisdom can I provide? You've had some like bangers on this podcast.
Bro, you're in the trenches.
Yeah, I'm in the trenches. So I can provide the perspective of a young married man who can, all that stuff.
And a new dad.
Yep, yeah. We'll get to all that, which will be great. But yeah, that's kind of the high level stuff. I work in marketing and private equity currently. And so, yeah, kind of getting my career off the ground and getting my family off the ground. And,
right.
Like you said, in the trenches.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So you mentioned you came to Sioux Falls to attend college here on a golf scholarship.
Yep.
You really love golfing. You're good at it.
I love golf.
Yeah, and you're good
Some
at it.
days.
See, like I love it for the relationship aspect of it. You love it because you're good at it. You know, like
I've had to lean more into the relationship side of it as I've gotten older and cherish that side.
Someday you and I will golf together.
Yes.
Okay. But you just need to be prepared that I am not good, and you
That's
need to
great.
lean heavily into that relationship side when you golf with me. Okay. I just like to drive the cart. That's what I like to do. I like to drive the cart. Okay. But anyway, so you come to USF.
Yep.
You meet your wife, Sarah, through her brother, Kyle, who Kyle was a teammate.
He was a teammate.
He was a teammate of yours.
Yep.
And he introduced you to his sister.
Okay. Yeah. Long story short, I mean, he brought me to a family dinner at one point. My wife claims that like we kind of remember that. Really how we met was through another group of friends of ours. And then it was this situation where instead of Kyle introducing me to his sister, I had to break the news to him that I'm dating his sister. And I did not know how that was going to go. And he handled it with grace. Welcomed me with open arms.
You're like sweating, like it's like when you go and ask a father for his daughter's hand in marriage. You're just wondering, I don't know how this is going to go. This is like going to the brother about, hey, I'm dating your sister.
So this is kind of what's happening, man. And he handled it great. I don't know how I don't have a sister, so I don't know how I would respond in that situation, but he handled it great. And I mean, we were brothers on the golf team, you know, we shared a lot through being on the team together and traveling. You sleep in the hotels together, you know, you're doing everything together. So we grew a lot through that and grew into being brothers and then just made it official.
Yeah.
I married his sister. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And you've also worked with Sarah on a lot of different things, correct? As far as like, so you're young, you're married, you're getting to figure out like what it is to be married, but then you're also doing some work together, right?
Yeah. So we're both in marketing. For 6 years, I had my own marketing agency called Fisheye Marketing, and she's worked in the marketing space as well, working for a few local companies. And there's just a lot of like overlap. Like I kind of came and kind of cut my cloth by being a writer. I kind of always prided myself on being a good writer. And then I met my wife and I'm like, I am not a writer. Like she can take everything to the next level. She's incredible. And so we've been able to kind of polish and sharpen each other that way. We've got complementary skill sets, both in the professional world and in the personal side, which is awesome. And so she's off on her own. So if anybody at home needs a website or copywriting work, pitch, and you can charge me for the ad after.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's amazing. So we're both in the marketing space, and we can kind of sharpen each other that way. And anybody who knows that they have a spouse where you can go home and talk comfortably about your careers, you know how much of a blessing that is.
Mm-hmm.
She sees my blind spots. I see hers and do not point them out. But yeah, we're able to sharpen each other, and it's pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's really a learning curve for all of us when we first get married is just how to be married. Right. I mean, because the dating experience is just different than being married. And as much as we try, we say, hey, it's not going to change much. I know that, my wife, when Laura and I got married, we've been married over 25 years now. And, but that was one of her greatest fears, is like, when we're dating, it's always fresh and fun. And you, no matter how tired you are, you'll drive, 50 miles to see him for 15 minutes and then turn around and all that. And then all of a sudden you get married, and then it's like mentally things change and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm interested in, beings that, yes, you have been married now 7 years. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, really, you're a wily veteran now.
Hey, some guys in the NFL don't make it 7 years.
That's true. We were talking that pre-show. So yeah, exactly. You've had a long NFL career right now in your marriage.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the things that you learned, Troy, in the early years of your marriage, that could be an encouragement maybe to some of those younger dudes that are either thinking about getting married or that are newly in their marriage right now as they're listening? Is there something that you just say, boy, here's some things that I learned, that Sarah and I learned in the first 3 years of being married, starting careers, those kinds of things?
Yeah. It's really good. And I'm glad you gave me some time to think about this by sending me this question, because I really wanted to answer this one correctly. And I think the biggest thing for us has been really strong and steady communication. I'm an external processor, so it helps me when I'm in the thralls of something, whether it's work-related, personal, whatever. We go on walks and we just hash it out. And it's honestly, it's almost always in a constructive and positive way. The communication lines are always open between the two of us. And I've seen a lot of marriages, even amongst young people that I'm close with, or a lot of times this happens with older folks. An observation that I have is like, they don't talk about certain things. Or I realize like, oh, like you two have never talked about how you believe in a mortgage or what kind of mortgage you believe in. You never even had that conversation. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, I've had that conversation 55 times. My wife's probably sick of hearing about it, you know? And that maybe leans more into like my strengths. Like I'm just a communicator and I have the ability, maybe the gift of gab or whatever. I have the ability to kind of pull things out. And so, we've had some conversations that are difficult, like pulling thorns out and stuff like that. But honestly, we've kept very open lines of communication. And we did that even while we were dating. I mean, we were very, very clear about like how many kids, we want to have and what we believe in our family and how do we want to raise up kids to, follow the Lord, and what do we believe about where we want to live. I mean, a lot of that stuff I think is like critical. Actually, at the time of this being published, my brother will be married. He's not married yet. And we were able to kind of talk about that. And I said, Sean, a lot of this stuff is really important to talk about. Like stuff that you may not think is like, oh, we'll figure it out as we go. Especially before you get married, you might not figure some of that stuff out as you go. You may just leave it under the rug forever. And I think it's really important to bring out every single part of your relationship and flesh it out. Talk through career, talk through living situation, talk through how to deal with family members and in-laws, talk through finances, be transparent about finances. A lot of that stuff has really laid a foundation for us that I think has allowed us to build a lot of trust with each other.
Well, and a lot of that is obviously super important, because there's always going to be things that come up along the way that you haven't spoken about, that you haven't talked about. So if you're pretty purposed in saying, okay, hey, we're gonna talk about as much as we're thinking about right now, that will allow some of those conversations to have already taken place. And then when the new stuff comes along, because again, there's always surprises in life. There's always things that are unplanned. I mentioned in a previous podcast with Tim about how Proverbs 16:9 says that as humans, as man, we make our plans, but it is the Lord that orders our steps. And so for us to say, okay, look, we're going to try to have these conversations, be more proactive in our communications versus reactive. That's going to pay nothing but great dividends. Yeah. Troy, was that something that you learned through someone modeling that for you, or was it just something that's just how you were wired? Was it in a premarital counseling that helped you kind of talk through some of it? Because the conversations you're talking about, they're not always easy.
No.
And you really have to be willing to go there. Dave Campbell in another previous podcast talked about saying the 10%. So we're comfortable sometimes saying the 90%.
We have withholds.
But then we withhold the 10. And sometimes that 10, if we continue to keep that in here, it bubbles out in other ways, sometimes unhealthy, right? So for you, was that something that you just learned along the way? I mean, how did that become a focus?
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to caveat with, while I realize we made the joke about me being 7 years married and that's like a veteran, I also understand how little I do know. And I don't want to come across as to a person who's been married, for your case, 25 years, people that have been married 30, 35, people listening to the podcast, like, oh, look at this kid. He really knows what he's talking about, huh? I guess he's an expert. Wait till he sees this or wait till he sees that. But, in terms of answering your question, I think I just always have been a communicator. And I actually heard an amazing quote. This was a few months ago, and it's really kind of stuck with me in a strong way. The level of success you have in your life is directly in proportion to the number of difficult conversations you're willing to have. And I heard that, and I was like, I heard it from a business standpoint.
Yeah.
I was like, that's at a personal standpoint too. Like, you want to have a successful marriage, you better have some difficult conversations. You want to have strong, vibrant friendships. Be willing to go places that other friends aren't willing to go. It can be ugly in there. It can be difficult. Same thing applies in business, I've found. Same thing applies for our careers, our faith. The number of, the level of success we have is directly proportionate to the number of difficult conversations we're willing to have. So yeah, I think I just I don't know where I learned. I can't think of specific people that would have modeled that maybe for me necessarily, but like, I've always been kind of an open book, and there's a blessing and a curse there. But yeah, I just communicate, and I'm, sometimes open my mouth too much, but in this instance with my wife, I think it's been something that hopefully has provided fruit. And if we're blessed and the Lord so blesses us with another 30 or 40 or 50 years of marriage, I know we have a lot more difficult stuff left ahead of us. And so like, I'm just thankful that there's like a perspective there of like leaning into it.
Yeah. And a foundation of open communication. I mean, that's key, is, like when you you talk about, the foundation of faith that we need to have, that marriage takes three, the husband, the wife, and the Lord, to really just, bind their hearts together. And a cord of three strands is not easily broken, right? So, I mean, we have that foundation of faith, but built within that foundation, there's other key components. And, if you look at it, and I just took a note on this the other day, so I want to get this out, and I don't know if I've ever done this on a podcast.
This is perfect. I'll kill time. All right,
no, but this is so good, because I sent this to a couple of friends, and because I was doing some reading this past week just kind of marriage stuff and whatever. And I know this isn't the main topic of our conversation, but since we're here, let's just dive in for a second. It talks about how some common mistakes that are made in marriage, and one of the most common mistakes, of course, is talking at the wrong time. So the miscommunication.
Guilty as charged.
Dr. John Gottman, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a marriage author and guru and all that. I don't know where he got this estimate, but let's just break it down. It says he estimates that couples are emotionally available to talk at the same time only 9% of the time. That means that 91% of the time is ripe ground for miscommunication. In other words, let's make sure we're communicating at the right time and aim for that 9%. So it's talking about, setting that stage so that we can have healthy and good conversations, whether those are the easy surface level ones or at the deeper level. And so I think about your walks as for you say, okay, look, our time of really communicating, saying that, okay, that 9%, and again, I don't know where he came up with that 9%, but he's written a lot of marriage books. So I mean, whatever, but let's just say that it's 19% or whatever. There's still a large amount of time where, someone's tired. Someone's just, brought home some emotions from the difficult working day. Someone's stressed out about the kids or finances or whatever. But where can we kind of emotionally come together and be available for for good communication to take place? Right. And so, that's what I'm hearing in your answer, Troy, is this whole idea of saying, okay, how do we just make communication paramount in our relationship, where there is a freedom and an understanding that we are for each other. Ted Cunningham talks about it of us. We're on the same team, and there is no winners and losers.
We call ourselves a team often.
Yeah, and we either both win or we both lose.
Right.
If it's a win-lose, guess what?
It's a lose-lose.
It's a lose-lose.
Yeah.
So
was it you or Ted that had the whole fight fair concept?
I remember that talk from Ted. Yeah,
it was Ted. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think the whole boundaries around like where communication exists, like my wife and I working together, like for those of you in the marketing and business space, I mean, we're on Slack, all day, or texting, and like messages are coming in and out. We basically got to a point we kind of know like our sacred spots are like, hey, we're either going to get dinner together, whether we eat it here or eat out, or we're going to go on walks. And we oftentimes are like, hey, put that on the list for the walk. Sounds nerdy, but then we got a list.
Yeah.
And you're on the walk. It's like, okay, here are the 4 things you sent me. Your parents want to have us over for dinner. Well, can we do that? It's like, it just gives us the ability to like understand that. I mean, like you said, the 9%, it's not like the 9% happens in like waves throughout the day. The 9% is something you can prepare for.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we're going to have the walk later. Hey, when he gets home from the office, we're going to do whatever we need to do with our baby and then go on a walk. It's like, great. She can mentally prepare. I can mentally prepare. 45 minutes, hammer it out. Anyways, it's just something that's worked for us. So maybe it can be of benefit to someone else.
Yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right. So you're married. You've got 6 years at the time, maybe a little less than that underneath your belt. You have kind of talked about, we want to have some kids.
Yep.
This is the number. This is kind of our plan, kind of a planning dude. So you
make a plan.
We got this plan of when we want to have kids and all that kind of stuff. So you get pregnant.
Yep.
You're excited about it. You're both elated. You're ready.
Yep.
You feel like that this has been going according to plan. You reach a point in the pregnancy where you feel like, all right, it's time to share. It's time to share with the family members, the big announcements, video, social media, the whole thing. And then family's excited. It's a huge celebration, whatever. And then just a couple days after that announcement, you hear some news that just went from celebration to sorrow pretty quick.
So my wife went in for her 12-week appointment. And our first baby, we don't know, boy or girl, obviously, was only measuring at 9 weeks. So, we'd lost our first baby last June of 2021. Actually, thankfully, just to correct a little bit of timeline, thankfully, we hadn't shared the announcement on social media yet. We were a day or two clear of sharing with all of our family, though.
That's right.
And it made it, I don't know what side of it made it more difficult or easy. I mean, I think it was nice to be able to kind of be in our cocoon for a few days. And there's a couple things too. It's like, I also understand with the caveat that, I mean, we've had one miscarriage. I've gone through this once. I don't claim to be like a miscarriage expert, but we've learned a lot throughout the whole entire process. God really has stewarded and molded my heart. I think one of the things that I'm really thankful for is a wife that can feel things deeply, and she can really express those emotions. And so for me, being someone who, I think before we were on, I think I told you I cry like once every 3 years. I don't tap into that part of myself. And I don't know if it's, maybe I need to go to therapy or something, but it just doesn't happen that often. So being able to sit with her in the same room while she's experiencing those emotions actually was a lift to me. It's like, I feel like, especially when we became married, it really did feel like we became one flesh, and like her releasing those emotions, me even just sitting in the presence of her allowed me to release some of those emotions. So anyways, we had to go through the whole procedure, and you go into the doctor and they do the unfortunate procedures, and then the weeks after that, and we, like you said, you led into it. We're planners or whatever. We kind of went into marriage. I always thought that when you get married is in your young 30s. Like, I just always had that perspective. So when I got married when I was 25, I felt like I was playing with house cards. I'm like, this is house money. I'm 5 years ahead of plan. Not that I planned for it, but I just always thought you would get married when you're in your 30s and whatever. So we kind of made the pact that we're going to do 5 years of just us, you basically, at some point, you're going to become an empty nester. Whether you're older in life or younger in life, you're almost there.
We're 1 year away.
You're 1 year away. So you're going to get there at some point. So regardless of whether you're 50 when that happens or 65 when that happens, the one thing that my wife and I talked about that we probably wouldn't be able to get back is you don't get back that young marriage, those years of young marriage together. So we tried to go 5 years and then started trying, and we didn't have a ton of complications. We didn't have to go that route, praise the Lord, in a lot of ways, but you get excited, you get your hopes up. It's like, all right, here we go. The times are, and you start to craft dreams for this baby. And anybody who's been through the experience of having a miscarriage, you understand that feeling of like the second the 2 little shoes are handed to you in your truck, which is what happened to me. You're like, all right, here we go. Like, this is going to happen. And then this is going to be awesome. And I'll be able to get on this timeline and yada, yada, yada. And when that's taken from you, you really have this existential question of like, okay, well, so how long is this wait in the desert going to be? You know, maybe this won't happen. You just start to question a lot of it. And you know, unfortunately it taints, you know, the next time, you know, and thankfully we were able to get pregnant again. It, you know, took a handful of months for sure, but you know, it taints the excitement of that second time, because you're like, oh boy, especially for someone who doesn't tap into their emotions very much, like, I'm not going to let myself get super excited. Yeah, and I'm not going to ride that roller coaster on the way down.
Yeah, and I want to get into that in a second here, just even because I think there can be some fear there in all of that, of just like, well, what if it happens again and so forth. So I do want to circle back on that in a second, but before we, you know, kind of get into that, I want to talk about, because you just said something really interesting, Troy, that says that, you know, you married a gal, Sarah, that feels deeply. And you know, and why I said that you had shared on social media in my head was because I actually found out about the miscarriage because I read what she wrote on social media. Exactly. Which then, you know, prompted me as soon as I got done reading it, you know, I think I called you
did.
And left a voicemail.
Which thank you, by the way.
Yeah. And, but I could tell by her writing, which again, yes, you are correct. She's a phenomenal writer, very eloquent, but you could feel her feelings in what she wrote. Like, yes. I mean, like I could very much like put myself in like your shoes and in like I almost felt like I was experiencing with you because of the way that she was able to, you know, put the pen to paper or the keys to the, to the computer or whatever. But so for someone that is a little less emotive, in a visible way, right? That doesn't mean that you weren't necessarily feeling the emotions on the insides. And I think that sometimes that we can, for people that don't emote externally and don't process externally, but they do it more internally, it can almost be like, oh, they must be okay. Or they, you know, it must not really be that big of a deal. So before I get into just like standing beside Sarah in that, I'm interested in just, so even though you weren't visibly shook or, okay, look, I need to be the man and stand beside my wife and, you know, whatever she needs me to be, how did you personally process the feelings that you were dealing with outside of, okay, this isn't what I planned? Right.
There's a lot to unpack. I want to think through the way to share this as my wife would eloquently. You know, one thing my wife has always understood about me, and I think if there's a lot of fellas listening to this that maybe are the same way as me, where it's hard to tap into that emotional side. It sounds like you said you're not that way. You're able to tap into it pretty well.
At different times.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say this. I'm an easy crier. That's what I am. Okay, I'm an easy crier.
See, and so I'm not as much of an ezy crier. But one thing that's always been beautiful about the way that my wife's understood me, and I've always said this, I'm like, just because I'm not crying, don't discount my feelings. Because I always felt that way. We've gone to grandparents' funerals together. Unfortunately, 3 summers ago, we lost my cousin to cancer. She was 37 years old, 5 kids. And I'm trying to recall back. I don't know if I cried during the entire thing. But my wife has a very sincere understanding of like, don't discount my emotions just because I'm not emoting it the same way as others. Anyways, all that to be said, we thought through how to process this. And my wife's a writer anyways. She writes a lot of things very similar to anybody who, you know, wants to read her blog about miscarriage. I think it's really beneficial to people who've been through it because I think she captured it in a way that I think a lot of people could resonate with. She writes a lot of things like that anyways that don't get published. She just does that. That's just how she processes. And we had to talk about it of like, is this something that we want to live in the shadows, or is this something that we feel can even help one person? And we kind of agreed together, like, yeah, this is probably something that needs to be shared. So we went through and made sure that both of us felt like we were represented accurately through it, and she was able to share it. And she received an outpouring of not only, appreciation for doing it, but she also received an outpouring of love from people who had been through it and shared a ton of wisdom with us that way as well. So it was pretty incredible. I mean, I know you asked about like how I was able to process the emotions. I think as a lot of men, you've spoken about this before, like as men, we're fixers. You know, we
Right.
okay, how can we break down the formula? Okay, I just experienced hurt. I'm going to deconstruct the hurt, and I'm going to develop a formula to where I don't get hurt the next time if we have another miscarriage, because I won't get hurt as bad, because I'll figure it out. I'm gonna create a solution to where I don't get hurt again. You know, that's kind of where my natural inclination goes. One thing that God really showed me through it, and I think where I ended up landing on the entire thing, and I don't want to say this as an overarching blanket to everybody, because I know that this can be a very sensitive topic, so I'm speaking openly in that regard, but I really came away with it as like a win-win-win scenario. Win number one is that I believe this is how God adds to his army in heaven. My wife lost her mom when she was 12 years old, and I think the day we found out about our miscarriage, I just told her, I said, you know, I think God knew that Grandma Julie needed a couple on her side as well. You know, and so I think the first win is that like that little soul was immediately, you know, taken to heaven, presence of Jesus. When that led to my second win, where I said, you know, the first face that baby now sees instead of my ugly mug is the face of Jesus, you know, like that first face, you know. And I was like, that's a huge win to not have to go through the pain and the suffering of this earth and go directly into the kingdom in the presence of the Lord. And then, well, then where does that leave us on earth here, right? And I think the third win that I came to through this whole thing is I believe that God has empathy for our suffering because he has suffered as well. He sent his son to die. But I also think there's like a strong part of God that doesn't get too consumed with our suffering in a lot of ways, because his ultimate quest is, are you coming closer to me? Are you drawing near to me? Like, if he cared overwhelmingly about our suffering, he would remove it. But he knows that us going through that is what draws us closer to him. And so, you know, through this whole experience, my wife and I drew closer to each other. We drew closer to the Lord, and the Lord says that's a win. And sort of like, I remember hearing this from, you know, I brought up my cousin who passed away 3 years ago. Her husband, Jeff, is a pastor at a church in Minnesota. And when this whole thing came out, he one of his main things was, when the kingdom wins, we win, regardless of how much it hurts on this side. Yeah. And so that's kind of where I landed. And I don't know if it's a formula for me to avoid future pain, but I kind of landed on this like win-win-win scenario. If the baby heads into, you know, the arms of Jesus first, sees his face first, and my wife and I are drawn closer to him through that experience, God views that as a win. And it's a win for his kingdom, and it's a win for his kingdom regardless of the pain we have here. And thankfully we were able to start a family. And
I think that's important. I think there's several things in there that are just important, Troy. But I think what your pastor friend with your cousin in Minnesota said is so key, because it's not discounting the hurt. It's not discounting the suffering, the pain, the tears. It's that, you know, as in Hebrews chapter 4 talks about, you know, we don't serve a high priest that is far off, but that walks with us through our suffering, that walks with us in our journey, in the sufferings and in the victories. And so the kingdom win, yes, 100%, man. I mean, we are so grateful that we know that the kingdom wins. And you know, in the life of this child that you and Sarah never got to hold. And, you know, and I think about those that, you know, it's I've read in different researches that, you know, that 15 to 20% of pregnancies end in a miscarriage.
I've heard the same thing.
And, you know, Laura and I went through one in between our two boys.
We talked about that.
There's countless friends that have gone through it. And so it's not like that we're discounting the hurt of that situation or that the Lord doesn't care. He enters in. But yes, that baby that we never got to hold, you and Sarah never got to hold, was immediately being held in the arms of Jesus, you know, and I think that is a comfort that hopefully is a good word for parents that are grieving. That doesn't make that you shouldn't grieve. You know, God enters our grief.
He does.
And grieving has stages, as we know. Grieving is a part of the human condition. I mean, what does John 16 say? Like, in this world you will have trouble, but how are we supposed to take heart? By knowing that Jesus overcomes the world, and he's bigger than our suffering, and he enters into that. So as you're processing that in that way, Sarah's processing it in her own way. And in writing, in tears, and you know, I think there's always this vision of you like you said, you're picturing things, the dreams that you have for your child. Even your statement of saying, we had these visions of what that was going to be like, and that wasn't. As guys, we can kind of decompartmentalize or compartmentalize and say, okay, well, we'll just move on. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to get this stuff done. Yeah. But tell me about just how Sarah processed through that, and then how did you support her in her way of processing and grieving?
Yeah, she was a key vessel, obviously, a key vessel for my grief and her processing it. Like I was kind of saying earlier, the fact that she was able to process through it, both through writing and through tears and through all that, allowed me to process through that. And I think one of the things, I've talked to a few friends that came through miscarriages, and they're buddies that were around my age, and one of the things I think as men we can experience as we go through a miscarriage is it's a unique type of tragedy where the wife, the woman, is so much more connected to this little baby than the man is. And there's a wide range of emotions, including one of the emotions I felt was guilt. Why am I not crying about this? She's been sobbing for, not sobbing, but like she's been torn up for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something wrong with my empathetic muscle. Do I not have the ability to feel? Boy, I must be a crappy person. And you go down this tunnel, and I had buddies that reached out and said, "Hey man, you feeling guilty?" And I'm like, "Wait a second, guilty?" I started thinking through it. I'm like, "Yeah." And I got on the phone with a good friend of mine. And he said, "Yeah." He's like, you have a wide range of emotions. One of them, for my friend, he said, we didn't know if we could afford a second kid. So when it happened, he's like, I had this split second relief. And he's like, then you feel this terrible grief about that. And you're like, why do I feel that? Why is this not, So anyways, I had some guilt about the fact that I wasn't able to emotionally process it maybe the way my wife was. But the fact that she, I think it's okay. Like I said, she's always understood that, like, don't discount my grief, which has been helpful as a man. But then just being able to sit with her and allow her to feel through her, very therapeutic for me. So anyways, I think a lot of men that may go through things like this, there's a wide range of emotions, and not all of them are sadness. Sometimes it's, like I was saying, grief and guilt and all this stuff. So I think it's very common to have the wide range. So I hope that sort of answers where you were going with that.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I really like that you talked about that, because it is, as depending on the situation, and I know that we're talking specifically about like miscarriage, but a lot of times there's things that we just say, okay, well, you know what? We can't change it. So pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we're going to, focus on what's ahead, what we can control, and let's move on.
Right.
And then there can also sometimes be this frustration that comes by, like, so you have guilt first of, well, maybe I should be feeling differently. But then there's this frustration of like, okay, but maybe you could grieve a little quicker because we got stuff to do. And then, and so like all of those things are a part of it. And so it's just bringing those underneath the authority of the Lord and saying, okay, God, help me manage this. And then identify, show empathy. And one of the things that I think is that I know that you really strive to do was just to be present in that and just saying, hey, what do you need at this moment? Because and I always call like that the ministry of presence. Sometimes we feel like as fixers or as people that we just need to make things better or whatever. Well, what's the right thing to say here? Or what's the right thing to do here? Well, sometimes the right thing is just kind of being there.
I was going to say, it is a wonderful lesson in understanding our own futility as men. Like, we can't fix this one.
Yeah.
We can be there. We can be there and try to lean and try to have perspective where we see fit. But otherwise, like, I love that. The ministry of presence. I lean into that.
It's as you think about, one of the things that just causes me to think about this is just how, and you mentioned this, that, those types of situations can drive you towards God or away from God or whatever. But if we allow these things to draw us to God, that second win, or maybe that was the third win that you mentioned. I think that was the third win you mentioned. That we experience the faithfulness and presence, the ministry of presence, and the faithfulness of God in new ways, right? In fresh ways, if we allow that to take place.
Yes.
So, all right. So now entering into the time of saying, okay, you know what, we're gonna try again, and you find out she's pregnant again, right, after some months. the emotions of, okay, is this time going to work?
You taper them a little.
Yeah. So was there some fear that
Yes.
you both felt at that time?
Yeah, I think that was one of my first reactions, and I can be a bit of a joy thief in situations like this where I'm like trying to grant perspective and being like,
I'm a realist.
Awesome, honey, this is amazing. We really okay. Let's just see how the next few weeks go before we get too excited, But it's like, that maybe was like Satan allowing some of that joy of that moment to be robbed from me, and I need to be conscientious not to let that happen again. But yeah, you do enter with a little bit of caution, and you're like, okay, well, here we go. But thankfully, everything went really well the second time through, and as the man, I think I just talked about this. The woman is so much more connected to that baby the second she finds out she's pregnant. For men, it takes us a while to like lean into that and realize like, oh, this is a baby that I'm going to be. And then, you go through to the birth, and I don't know, am I jumping ahead in the notes? Little Calvin was born on July 27th.
Not little Calvin, not little, but I mean, big Calvin.
Hey, his dad was a 10-pound baby, so he's got that going for him.
8 pound, 12 ounces, Calvin.
Yeah.
Tell me the thing I have to know. Tell me you have a Hobbs stuffed animal.
Great story. Okay, so.
Do you?
We do. We didn't tell anybody we didn't know if we were having a boy or a girl, by the way. We did the whole thing blind, and we didn't tell anybody our names. And we kind of had Calvin picked out as a name and stuff. So
yeah.
we had the baby, we texted family, and Sarah's sister Lauren came to the hospital with her daughter Stella and their other daughter Audrey to meet Calvin. They didn't know boy, girl, whatever. Enter the room, there's tears, it's a boy, oh my gosh, his name's Calvin. Anyways, Stella, her 5-year-old daughter, comes up with a gift, and she has a blue gift. She hands it to us, and we're like, Stella, this is so sweet. She goes, it's a tiger. And it's like, okay, well, that's not how we give gifts. You don't tell people the gift when you give that to them. So anyways, we open it, and we're like, oh, this is so soft and cute, whatever. Put it off to the side. And Sarah's uncle came by a few hours later, and he looks at the shelf, and he goes, oh, it's Hobbs. And it's like, that's Hobbs. So it's Hobbs. Calvin has Hobbs.
Oh, that is so good. That is just so good. That's the first thing I thought when I saw because when I texted you originally,
right,
and asked you to be a guest,
I think it was
literally that day.
It was that day. Yeah,
you said it was that afternoon because you said at 6:00 we're going in to induce labor.
Yep.
And so I'm like, oh, it's so awesome. We'll be praying that everything goes well and whatever. And then I texted you the next morning and said, hey, you got a baby? And you said, yep, Calvin, whatever. And the first thing I thought of when you sent the pic was like, we got to find this kid a Hobbs stuffed animal because that would be so perfect.
Yep, it worked out great.
All right, so
hopefully less mischief.
Yeah. Well, it's firstborn, so you might be okay.
Might be okay.
All right. So the verse you shared, you put on socials after he's born was whatever is good and perfect. James 1:17-18. Mm-hmm. Whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. He chose to give birth to us by giving us his true word, and we, out of all creation, became his prized possession.
Yeah.
Why that verse?
I wish I could take more credit for it. My wife was actually discovered that verse as we were kind of pondering through middle names, and James was always on our list. And she said, honey, I got this to share with you. And it was like, wow, that is exactly the scripture that comes over this baby. And as we've learned now, these are called rainbow babies. The babies you have after a miscarriage is called the rainbow baby. And so that was a perfect namesake for Calvin's middle name. And that verse really spoke to, obviously it spoke incredibly to my wife. She was able to kind of pull that, but we kind of have been able to believe that this is like a verse that can be over his life a little bit,
mm-hmm.
That we went maybe, it's 15 to 20%, so it's not terribly non-traditional, but having to wait and be patient for that firstborn, that every good and perfect gift comes from above. And so,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that.
Long story short.
And, there's a section of that really speaks to something that we were just talking about, and that's the faithfulness of God. And there's a small sentence in those two verses that says he never changes or casts a shifting shadow, and then it ends with, and we are his prized possession. And I love that. It reminds me of Ephesians chapter 3, where we're told that I think it's Ephesians chapter 3, where he talks about that we are his masterpiece, and it's that Calvin is his masterpiece, and that each of our kids, that we, as he looks at us as his sons and daughters, regardless of our age.
And born or unborn.
Yeah, we are a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just regardless of, you know, the previous the podcast, and I know you know him, it was Tim that we released just a couple weeks ago, and dealing with this disease and all this. But when God sees him, he sees a masterpiece.
Absolutely.
When God sees my special needs nephew, he sees a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's literally throughout Scripture. It's clear.
However the world sees, and we live in a world that casts judgment and determines your success based on achievements, beauty, finances, whatever. But yet God says what? Regardless if you are my masterpiece. So I just think that's such just a beautiful verse and a great theme verse. And for a kid to grow up in this world today, knowing that they're a prized possession of the Lord.
Absolutely.
Bro,
changes their perspective.
Yeah.
Changes their ability to make decisions. Changes their outlook.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely 100%.
Yeah.
So you're a new dad.
New dad.
Yeah. I mean, so
diaper shifts. I'm getting into the diaper shifts, learning how that rolls. Learning how the sleep thing rolls. We're figuring it all out. Honestly, like I think too, like I've waited a little bit, 32 to have your first. I feel like maybe that's a little older. I don't know. All of our friends had kids already. So I think I handle things at 32 differently than I would have handled them at 25.
Yeah.
Because I was like, boy, having a kid, this is going to be brutal. Like this is going to just ravage our life. But it's like, it's actually been somewhat palatable. Like you just deal with him and he's cute. I'm not biased at all.
Yeah, of course not.
Cute kid. Super cute kid. Yeah. But yeah, it's been awesome so far. We've been working on his counting. He can't figure that out, so we're trying
I guess he's not advanced. I guess he's not advanced. And just to not be talking already at just a few months old.
Sarah said some funny stuff too. She texts me, he's moving his head. They say it takes 6 months. I'm like, honey, our child is so advanced. He is so advanced.
Yeah, exactly.
All parents, I think, fall into that.
That's so good. So as the transitions, we talked about the transition from dating to marriage, and I know we're going to wrap up our time here pretty quick, but another big transition is adding a child. And yes, you are a little bit older, so maybe you're more mature, can handle that, like you just said. I mean, I was 26 when our first, when Isaiah was born, and I mean, it rocked my world. And I mean, but I was kind of a nervous Nelly as a new dad and all that kind of stuff anyway. but at any rate, one of the things I think couples often struggle with when they get a new baby in the house, especially, is how to not neglect the marriage.
Absolutely.
And you and Sarah had, a great 5, 6, 6+ years together prior to welcoming Calvin in the world. So how have you, Troy, and maybe this is something that you're working on, so I don't expect you to have all these things that you do, but are there things that you're doing to make sure that you don't neglect Troy and Sarah time, so that it's not all just focused on, oh my gosh, it's just crazy having a new baby in the house or whatever. So how are you, I guess the shorter question is, how are you caring for your marriage in this new season?
That's a good question. This is one I probably could have prepared for more, because I'm thinking through a few different things. I think one of the key things we've done is we've really tried hard to bring Calvin into our world instead of ourselves into his world, where Calvin's been on the golf course now twice. Was it my wife just straps up.
So he can't count, but he can golf.
He can golf. Yeah. Advanced. Very advanced young man. He's a very advanced young man. So my wife just straps him up, and we go on walks anyway. So she'll strap him up on her little chest thing, and he'll tuck his little body in, and he'll just go to sleep. And I think I played 11 holes one night, and she walked, and so we're bringing him into our life a little bit. And I think that's been really important, because obviously it sounds like, oh, Troy, you're just selfish, you want to golf, and that's true. But what it's really been able to do is allow us to still be married. Still be us, still go on dates. Calvin's been downtown now a couple times. Calvin's been to the office. I don't bring him during work times, but we've stopped by, and Sarah's like, hey, we should walk around downtown. And I'm like, awesome, bring Calvin by. You can sit on the couch, you can feed him quick, and then we can go walk around a little bit. Bringing him into our life, meaning that and this is something I hope I can hold myself accountable to 30 years from now, is that as much as I'm going to love my kids, I really hope that my kids can understand that they come second in our household, and that it's about me and their mother. And that like I think I wish I was better. I had a better memory of where I heard this, but I remember hearing from either it was a sermon or a podcast at some point within the last decade, and it was a very clear note of a father, and he'd had kids and raised them all up, and he said one of the things that was very clear, my kids understood when they came and like they rushed me at the door when I got home from work. It was very clear that none of them got attention until I hugged and kissed their mom. It's a priority thing, is how he described it. And that's always stuck with me. And so I've even done it to Calvin, even as a joke. He doesn't understand anything. Right. And I come in and say, buddy, you're second. And so I'll go up, kiss mom on the forehead, and then go down and kiss him, But I think that's been really big. It's just bringing him in, incorporating him into our world a little bit. And making sure that we still are going on walks. They've been less frequent, but going on dates, they've been less frequent. And like I said, I mean, by the time this podcast gets released, we're still only months into it. Yeah. So we're learning and we're discovering, and 1 is a lot easier than 4. I've talked to some parents who said 1 is the hardest because it's the biggest change. Going from 0 to 1 is the biggest leap. 1 to 2, you figure it out. 2 to 3, you figure it out. We'll see. Who knows what the Lord will bless us with, but trying to bring him into our world, I think would be my short story long.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. No, well, and even what you just said there is key to remember, I think. And I've heard it put this way, one of the most important things that you can do for your kids is to love their mother and to model that and to show just how deeply you love your wife. Because that's another thing that's so crucial for kids to see in our world today, is a healthy marriage. And that doesn't mean that there aren't disagreements, but it means that you know how to disagree well, to fight fair, like you said, earlier in our time together, and to show them that, look, we are going to make priority time together so important, and you're going to see that. I mean, when our kids were little, obviously now, like you said, we're 1 year from empty nesting, but when they were little and able to take care of themselves or whatever, we would often say, like, let's say when they were 7 and 10, and I don't mean like take care of themselves, cook themselves dinner or whatever, but we knew that they were okay on their own, doing their own thing, whether it be doing a little bit of homework or playing on their own or watching a video or whatever, but playing a game together, whatever. But saying, hey, mom and dad, from 6:30 to 8:30 downstairs, that's off limits. Mom and dad are just going to we're going to play a game together. We're going to put a puzzle together. We're going to watch a movie together.
That's great.
And we're just going to have a little home date together. And so we instituted these home dates at least once every 2 weeks, and said that unless something is like really a problem or somebody's hurt or whatever, like that's mom and dad's time to invest in each other, because
I love that.
We need to have a strong relationship here so that, we can have a strong relationship with you, and we want to model a healthy marriage. Now, did we always do that? No. Hopefully though, our kids, as they get out of the house and they go into marriages themselves, they will at least have seen us prioritize time together. And so I think that's crucial. You're laying that foundation already. I agree.
I know he's been a guest on your podcast before, Rick Melmer.
Oh, yeah.
He gave a piece of advice, too, that was talking through, and he just shared this on a podcast the other day, and I heard it. I'm like, Rick, you're awesome. Rick's in a Bible study with me, and he's just amazing.
Yeah, love him.
So Rick said, you're going to be parents to your kids as adults far longer than you're going to be to them as kids. He's like, if you're lucky, you're looking at 18 years as a kid, perhaps you're looking at 20, 30, or 40 with them as adults. And I think that's true for being a parent, but I can't speak to Rick's expertise at that level of being a parent for that long. But what I can say is that you're going to be married hopefully that long as well. And so I've always feared the marriage of having 2, 3, 4 kids. We get wrapped up into events. We get wrapped up into kids' schedules. The house becomes kid-centric. The kids leave, and then you look across and say, who is this I'm sitting across from the table with? I don't know who you are. I've heard that story before, and I've seen statistics about divorce rates. It's the second highest.
It's the second highest divorce rate.
And it's always stuck out to me. I'm like, I am not going to allow that to happen. I'm going to know my wife. And I'm not going to do it perfectly because, you guys have listened to this podcast. That's not possible for me to do that perfectly, but I'm going to know my wife and place her at the priority. So
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
So what is God teaching you right now, Troy, as we get ready to kind of land this plane from this podcast here together? So what's the Lord teaching you right now?
That my golf game might not. Yeah, I might not be as good. Yeah, I don't know. It's been slowly declining, anyways. One thing I always am just praying for is and I probably, it sounds ad nauseum during our dinners with my wife, is I'm always just praying for us to have wisdom and to always make the decisions in our life that may not be easy, but might be right. And so I think what God's really been teaching me, I'm always just praying, God, give me wisdom. God, give me wisdom. And I look at myself and I say, God, you have not granted my prayer. But I think there's been a lot of even nuggets just as reflecting into our time coming into this time where I've been able to realize he has been able to bestow upon me some nuggets of blessing, some nuggets of wisdom that like I don't know if I would be there if I hadn't been praying specifically. It's like what Solomon did in the Old Testament, right? God said, what would you like of anything in the world? And he asked for wisdom, and so I take that very personally to heart. And so I think that's kind of what he's teaching me. I mean, through parenthood, there's going to be a lot. I mean, I'm a very new dad here, so there's going to be a lot he'll be teaching me going forward, but trying to, if wisdom is the true, in Solomon's word, the true treasure, like just trying to seek that every day and knowing that it's not because of my own unbelievable understanding to think and to whatever. It's just God decided to have grace that day and give me a little nugget of wisdom. So I don't know. That's probably my best answer for now. Have me on for a second podcast and I'll go on. Maybe I'll have a better answer that
seeking
time.
wisdom. No, that's good, dude. Listen, if we all had that prayer, right? Of man, let's help me seek wisdom today. Help me be wiser at the end of today than I was at the beginning.
Right.
And
if I want any chance to be wise when I'm 60, I better start praying when I'm 25. You know, like that's kind of my thought is like, I better not pray for wisdom when I am, an elderly dad or whatever. Like I'm going to start now and hopefully over 30 or 40 years that there's some there. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Well, brother, this has been, just super fun. I mean, at least for me. So I don't know if it's for you, but this has been super fun. And we do something at the end of our podcast every time where I just call it the final word, just kind of 60 seconds or so of whatever kind of final words of encouragement or challenge or, scripture, whatever the Lord lays on your heart to share with listeners as kind of, this is what Troy's leaving us with on the Giving Life podcast. So you got a final word for us, my brother?
I don't know. We've covered a lot of things. I don't know. I would just, these were the words that my father-in-law shared at our wedding. He grabbed the microphone, and anybody who knows my father-in-law, Paul, he can cry at the drop of a hat as well. He is like tied into that side of his emotions. But he grabs the mic, and when he gets the microphone, he can go and he can speak, and he's very talented in that regard. But like one of the first things he said, he just grabbed the mic and he just looked, and he said, "If I had a piece of wisdom to share for you guys," and he just like looks back and he just says, "Just trust the Lord." And I was like, I thought he was gonna go on with it, and then he went on to his next point, and I was like, wow, yeah. Just trust the Lord. And so I don't know. That was another thing that was another question I didn't really prepare for coming into it. So I wish I had a better final word, but I don't know. Trust the Lord.
Listen, dude. If again, if we walk away with the statement, the mandate of trust in the Lord, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding.
I love that.
All your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight.
Yep.
That's a pretty darn good.
Sure is.
Pretty darn good final word. So,
sure
Troy, thank you for spending some time with me here and just sharing your story and sharing your wisdom.
There we go.
With us today.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. A lot of fun. Appreciate everything you're doing, Tom.
All right, brother. Well, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for listening in on my conversation with Troy Klongerbo. If you found our convo helpful, I encourage you to share it with others that may find it helpful as well. Before you sign off, if you are open to it, I'd love for you to take 30 seconds to rate and or review the podcast, as that is such an easy way to help us grow our audience and our impact. If you'd like to connect more with Troy, you can find him on LinkedIn, Instagram, and also Twitter. All right, thanks again for joining me today, everybody. We'll see you next time for another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others.